Hey guys, how you going? So today on Big House Sport, we are here talking about the NRL draw that has just been announced. Yes, I'm very excited for the 2022 NRL season in November. 2021. Yes, a bit of an issue there, but then again, every single Wednesday we put out those NRL drafts where we do all 16 different teams with 16 different content creators, and it's also still keeping me in the NRL, bit of the mindset there. But today, guys, the NRL draw has been released, and we're going to go through all 16 teams and kind of read out the beginning of their draw, the origin period, and then obviously the last 5 games that are the tough run home for whether you're trying to get first or whether you're trying to get top 4, maybe top 8, or if you're trying to avoid that wooden spoon, obviously. Now, you got to remember that when I'm doing this draw reaction, it is my opinion, obviously. Now, things can change between now and February, March, when we start to do our NRL previews that you guys also love. So don't worry, they will come out later on when it's very close to the season. But this is definitely going to be my opinion based off kind of my immediate thoughts after the 2021 season, what I think of it's going to happen next year. And let's get going. But before we get going, hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. Obviously, it's free. Why would I even need to say that, son? You should already be subscribed. I'll give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 1. There you go. You should be subscribed. Let's get into it. Alrighty, so before we get into each individual team, just want to put out the big things here. Obviously, the Indigenous game will be early February, which is brilliant. Obviously, a month before we get into the season, which is a great start because we have pre-season around then. We'll be doing our tier maker rankings of all the different players around then. So do keep in mind they'll be in the beginning of February. But the first round of the season, very exciting. We do start off with the Panthers and Manly Seagulls game. This is incredible. Obviously, Panthers versus Rabbitohs could have been something they threw out there. I actually prefer Panthers versus Manly. 1, because Manly are a very exciting team, and 2, Panthers are the current champions. Look, I don't think that Manly are the greatest team ever. They've got issues, but in the same sense, like, this is a very exciting game to start off with here. Have a good defense, but also can be a little bit lackluster. Overall, I think it's going to be a very enjoyable game to start the season off on Thursday night, and I definitely can't wait for that one. But another one that I did notice on the first week is obviously the Broncos versus Rabbitohs game, and we all know that's a big game now because 1, there's no Wayne Bennett there anymore, but 2, this is going to be Adam Reynolds' first game for the Brisbane Broncos, and obviously he's grown up as a lifelong Rabbitohs fan and playing the Rabbitohs, won a premiership with them, and he's been pretty fantastic for the last couple of years with them. So overall, that's going to be an incredible start to the season that weekend. Yes, there's all these other games, but these are the 2 real highlights of round 1. The first team we're going to go through is the Bulldogs, the Canterbury Bulldogs. Now, they actually have a pretty easy start. They do take on the Cowboys and the Broncos. Now, this is very relative because the Broncos, it comes down to whether you think they're going to be good this year. With the signing of Adam Reynolds, I'm still very tentative on them with the fact that their spine is still quite lackluster besides Reynolds. There's still a lot to be, seen with this Brisbane Broncos team. So I'm going to utilize them as a easy, per se, relative team throughout this list. But at times, I will give them credit. But they do get a tough run after this. They play the Manly, Storm, both away, the Panthers at home, and then the Rabbitohs away. That is a very tough opening 6 games there. Obviously, yeah, Cowboys and Broncos. If you want to put the Broncos in with the tough games, you can. That's 5 of the first 6 that are very tough. So if you believe the Bulldogs are going to have a good year this year, they're going to have to really pump home through this origin period because it's actually pretty decent. They've got Panthers before week 1, but outside of that, it's pretty open. They're not exactly in a bad position. And then it comes down to the final game. You better hope they've already made the 8 if you believe they make the 8 because they play Manly, which is the last game, which is very tough. But besides that, the final run home isn't actually that bad. So to overall wrap up the Bulldogs side of the draw, their opening start is incredibly tough. Probably the toughest start across all the different teams in the competition. The origin period is actually pretty easy for them comparatively. They are the wooden spooners currently. But the final run home is pretty decent, just except for that Manly game, which is the final game of the season. For the Dragons, I'm not exactly a big believer in the Dragons right now, but for the Dragons, their first 5 rounds are very tough outside of the Warriors round 1 with the Panthers, Sharks, Eels, and Rabbitohs. Probably not as tough as that Bulldog start, but still pretty tough run there. Decent origin period. It's not too bad. There's nothing even really kind of to bring up there. There's no real smashing tough games for the Dragons. And their last 5 games, they got the Sharks, the Raiders, the Titans, the Tigers, and the Broncos, which isn't too tough. So the Dragons should be pretty happy with their draw. Yeah, look, they've got a relatively rough start in those opening first 5 round games, but the origin period is pretty okay, and the end of the season is pretty okay, but the question mark is the Dragons okay? Is their team still going to win those games, even though they're actually relatively easy? Moving on to the Newcastle Knights, the Roosters, Panthers, Manly are in their first 5 weeks, which is a tough start. Besides that, pretty okay. Origin period, very tough with the Panthers, the Raiders, the Titans, the Rabbitohs, Manly, and the Roosters all throughout that origin period. Wow, that is an incredibly rough origin period there for the Knights. Wow, we don't know what's happening with Mitchell Pearce. Callum Ponga will more than likely be out with Queensland. I can't see the Knights winning many of those games, which really could screw them come that end of the season. Their last 5 games, Tigers, Broncos, Raiders, Titans, and Sharks were all relatively winnable, but the last 4 may be against teams competing for the 8. The Titans will be competing for the 8. The Sharks, it depends on how you think of them. The Broncos, maybe, I don't know. Raiders, definitely, and the Tigers, get out my face. So, yeah, look, overall, man, they've got a pretty tough schedule. I'm not going to lie. That first 5 weeks with Roosters, Panthers, and Manly is pretty bullshit. That origin period is very bullshit, and the last 5 games, it comes down to the fact that they're not exactly crazy teams, besides maybe the Titans, but then I'm a Titans fan, I'm going to believe in them more so than everybody else, but all those 4 of those 5 teams will more than likely be competing for a top 8 spot, so I think the Knights might actually have the toughest run of the lot out of all 16 teams. Next up, we have the Rabbitohs. Now, they got a really tough start here with the Broncos and Storm away. Now, Broncos away at Suncorp is probably going to be a difficult game this year, so that's why I said I'll give them credit at some points throughout today. Broncos and Storm away, Roosters at home, and the Panthers away. That's a very, very tough start there for their first 4 games. They've got an okay origin period, though, against the Titans, the Dragons, the Eels, the Knights, and the Dogs. You can't really complain with that one. And their last 4 games are hard with the Eels, the Panthers, the Roosters, and I didn't write their last game down. Let me actually quickly go have a look here. 3 of their last 4 games are the Roosters, the Panthers, and the Eels, and they've got the Cowboys last round 24. So I don't really count the Cowboys as too great of a team, to be honest with you. We all kind of are understanding of that. So yeah, I'm going to go with the fact that they've got a very tough start. They've got a pretty okay origin period. The last 4 games is very tough. So, not the greatest schedule for the Rabbitohs, and we don't really know how they're going to go with no Wayne Bennett and also with no Adam Brett. Next up, Roosters. Not too hard to start with the Knights, Manly, Rabbitohs, Cowboys, and Broncos, but they've got a very, very difficult origin period versus the Raiders, the Storm, the Eels, and the Panthers. But they do get a bye, I believe, for Game 3 of Origin. The final 2 games, very hard. Storm and the Rabbitohs. The last 5 is pretty okay, but those last 2 games, Storm and the Rabbitohs, is an incredibly rough ending to the season. So they better hope they're already in the top 4. Obviously, they're going to be a top 8 team, you would assume anyway. And yeah, it's not the greatest of draw there for the Roosters. Yeah, look, they've got that pretty easy. It's not a greatly hard start. But in the same sense, you could see it that way with Manly, Rabbitohs, and potentially the Broncos. And if you think the Knights are going to be good this year, then great. If you think the Cowboys, then let's probably move on to the next one, eh? Let's probably move on to the next one if you think the Cowboys. The Cronulla Sharks, pretty easy start, to be honest with you. Raiders, Dragons, Knights, Tigers, and Eels. The Origin's not too crazy, besides the Titans and the Storm, and the last 3 games are not too hard, but a little bit tricky against the Manly, Dogs, and Knights. Like, look, the Dogs are a team that could do something this year. I don't believe so. Manly, they're a good team. Knights, how you going? They could be competing for the 8, so should be competing for the 8, but then again, how you going? I don't complain about this draw here with the Sharks. I think they'd be pretty happy with it, and I don't think there's really much to talk about here because there's nothing really going on here with this draw with the Sharks, and maybe that might be very situational with that team right now. Moving on, my boys, the Gold Coast Titans. Now, we have the Eels twice in the first 5 rounds, which is interesting. Eels twice, round 1 and round 5. Our first game, I believe, is at Seabus Super Stadium, but then they play the Warriors, the Raiders, and the Tigers, so it's not exactly too hard. Like the Eels, I know they've beaten us the most recent couple of times, but in the same sense, it's usually Titans have a good record against the Eels. The Warriors, usually the bogey team, but we beat them by like 40-0 or whatever as the last game of last season. And the Raiders and the Tigers, it's not too hard. You can definitely say that it's winnable there for the Titans. All 5 games are winnable, but it comes down to how the Titans are going into 2022. The origin period's not terrible. It's against other teams around the edge of the 8, though. Nothing really to be kind of picking out here, but it's around teams around the edge of the 8 potentially. The final 3 rounds are pretty easy, relatively anyway. The same last 2 games was 2021, which is the Knights and then the Warriors. But the Warriors game is saying it's at Mount Smart, so they're saying this game will be in New Zealand, and that might make it a very tough final game. So they've got to hope they've already made the 8 by that time, because that'll be a tough one in New Zealand. Alrighty, the West Tigers. Every single game here is tough. Let's move on. The Brisbane Broncos. Interesting team, this one. Rabbitohs and Roosters in the first 5 does make it tough, but the other 3 are very winnable. Origin 1 bye, Storm, Titans, Eels, all tricky, so not too terrible of an Origin period, but that Storm, Titans, Eels trifecta, that could be interesting there for the Bronx. Depends on how many Broncos players are out there with Origin. They don't exactly have a great deal of Origin players, besides maybe Payne Haas. Finish off with the Dragons, but Roosters, Storm, and Eels in the last 5 is not fun. So they better be hoping they've got a pretty good record going into those final 5 games, because the Eels, Roosters, and Storm, not looking good there for the Brisbane Broncos. North Queensland Cowboys, yikes. Besides the Roosters, round 4, first 5 are all pretty winnable. Chad Townsend and Dearden as a halves, though, is it winnable? But whatever, you think I'm sleeping on cows? Okay, cool. Barring Manly, Titans, Origin schedule's not that tough, though, to be honest with you. The Roosters, Rabbitohs, and Panthers as a 3 of final 4 games is terrifying, specifically the Rabbitohs and the Panthers as the last 2. So, geez, not a good ending there for the Cowboys, but, pretty open first couple of rounds, and a pretty open schedule besides Manly and Titans. So, if you believe the Cowboys are going to do well this year, they might actually genuinely be in a position by the time they have those final games, but they better hope that they've already won enough games before they get to those final 2, because Rabbitohs and Panthers, wowee, not fun, man. Not fun. But about the Eels. Titans twice in the first 5 rounds, like I said, and also the Storm, and maybe the Sharks is relatively hard start. Origin 1 bye. Roosters, Rabbitohs are the only difficult games throughout Origin. Very hard run home, though. Incredibly hard run home with Manly, Rabbitohs, Dogs, Broncos, and Storm. And I think that Broncos game might be away. Not too sure. Do forgive me if I'm wrong. But that's a tough run. Manly, Rabbitohs, and Storm specifically. Dogs, 50-50. Broncos, 50-50. But I think that's a really tough run there for the Eels to be, if they think they're making the top 4. I don't think so, but, it's still a very tough run for the Eels at the end. Next up, the current champions, Penrith Panthers. Manly, straight away, very tough start. Rabbitohs, round 3. The other 3 games are very winnable, but every game is relatively winnable here for the Panthers this year. Origin 3, they do have a bye. They've got a very easy Origin schedule besides the Roosters. Last 5 games, 50-50. Raiders, Storm, and Rabbitohs are quite tough. But the last 2 versus the Warriors and Cowboys should be a bit of a, run in the park there for the Panthers. So you can't complain with that draw. Canberra Raiders, the most disappointing team of 2021. Fact, not even a question. Sharks, Cowboys, okay start, not too terrible, but then they get absolutely smashed by a 3-game schedule that is tough with the Titans, Manly, and Storm. Wow, very tough run there. Origin 3, they have a bye, but the Eels, Roosters, and Storm are tough. Elsewise, pretty okay. Last game, the Tigers is a dream draw. You can't complain with getting to play the West Tigers as your final game of the season, especially if you're trying to compete for the 8. But Manly and Panthers in the last 5 is not great. And the Knights will also kind of be there competing for the 8, so that'll be a bit of a tough one, potentially. Manly Seagulls. The Manly Seagulls, Panthers and Roosters. Tough games to start off with there. The Dogs, Rays, and Knights, next 3, open to interpretation. Origin 3 bye. Storm only difficult. Easy Origin draw. Can't complain with that. Sharks, Dogs, Raiders, not difficult, but the Roosters, Eels, and Titans just before that. So their final 3 games are pretty easy, but the Roosters, the Eels, and the Titans, they're going to provide a bit of a tricky situation. So I'd still be pretty happy with that final run home, considering the final 3 are definitely very winnable. Nothing really to complain about overall. Melbourne Storm, they get the Tigers first up. Wowee, that's an easy one. Jeez, of course the Storm get the easy game to start off with there. Rabbits, Eels, Dogs, and Raiders are also there. So besides the Rabbits, and to be fair, I think this is a pretty easy start. And it's the Storms. Everything's going to be a relatively easy start. But the Dogs, Raiders, and Tigers should be something that the Storm should be winning pretty easily. Rabbits and Eels, it's open to interpretation, but I think they'll beat the Eels like usual. Whatever, Eels fans, you beat them twice in 2021. Whatever. Storm usually beat you, besides that. Origin 1 bye, but play Manly twice. Roosters, Sharks, Broncos in tough periods. So that's a really, really rough Origin period, especially with how the Storm will have a lot of players out as per usual. The last 5 games are pretty bullshit, to be honest with you. So they get a pretty easy run to start off with, but that Origin period, tough one. And the last 5 games, oh my god. Okay, so let's read through this. Titans, Panthers, Broncos away, Roosters, and Eels. That is a ridiculous run home. And that's exactly what the Storm want, because they want to be prepared for the finals. But they have 5 teams that this year. Broncos away is competing for potentially the 8. We never know. But the Titans, Panthers, Roosters and Eels specifically, wow, that's a tough run home there for the Storm. But still all winnable games for them. The final team here, the New Zealand Warriors. We apparently get to see them go home this year, which will be fantastic to see. Their first 5 games, relatively breeze, besides the Titans and maybe the Broncos. Manly, Panthers and Eels throughout Origin. Game 3 bye. It doesn't really affect them much though, but it's still tough. Origin doesn't really affect the Warriors because obviously they won't really have players out. But still a tough-ish draw. Rabbitohs, Panthers, Titans in their last 5 is difficult. But they finish off the season in New Zealand against the Titans, who usually they are the bogey team of, besides that round 25 game of this year. So, look, you can't really complain a great deal about the Warriors draw. I think the first 5 games, definitely all winnable games. Even the Titans game is still very winnable. But their Origin period is tough despite not having players out. And that final 5 games is tough, but in the same sense, they get to finish off in New Zealand. So, pretty decent draw there for the Warriors. Finally, Origin, big one. Game 1 in Perth, Game 2 in New South Wales, and Game 3 in Queensland. Overall, you know, Game 3 is interesting that Queensland get it. I was kind of expecting New South Wales to get Game 3, because then if Queensland win one of the 2 games, it'd be very tough for them to win Game 3. But overall, New South Wales are the current champions, so it shouldn't really matter too much where the games are. Perth at the beginning. Usually, you expect New South Wales to win the away game in a different state. The second game in New South Wales, Queensland usually have a pretty good record there, but overall, New South Wales should probably have this series locked up by Game 2, and then Game 3, Queensland probably win that one. But overall, man, it's going to be interesting with Queensland this year. Changes in the coaching. We'll see how it all works out. They were pretty poor in the first 2 games last year, but Game 3, obviously, they did win. So it might go similarly this year, but you never know with Origin. But guys, that's going to do us for today's video. Obviously, don't forget, throughout this off-season, every single week on Wednesday, we have a new team with a new draft. So far, we've already put out the Titans, the Broncos, the Eels, the Knights, and the Dragons comes out tomorrow for you guys. There is definitely another one somewhere. There's definitely another one somewhere that I've forgotten here. But overall, we're doing all 16 teams. So there are some already out. There's still a lot to come. So hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe if you're new around here. We pump out all different types of sport content here, not just the rugby league. So you will get a heap of videos in your feed in the off season to get you by. And then we're going to go bing, bang, boom, right in your face with vlogs, with live streams, and with content when it arrives in March. But alrighty, guys, it's time to jump off. And I will see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Catch you later. See ya.